credibility of peacekeeping, and for that envisage a series of actions. I think the problem arises because peacekeeping, and that's something that is well known to you, since the end of the Cold War has been more and more called upon to address new types of conflicts. It had happened once before during the Cold War for the first Congo operation, but it's become a much more systematic way of using peacekeepers is to address civil wars. And the issue of robust peacekeeping would not, I should turn that off probably, sorry, I had it, well, it's just complicated. The issue of robust peacekeeping would not have been as prominent if we had not been faced with conflicts which I think have two main characteristics. One is that they now involve non-state actors, and in a way that is an important challenge for peacekeeping as we used to understand it, because when peacekeeping was about monitoring ceasefires, consolidating a peace between state actors, there was the political capital of state actors at stake. When the first Blue Helmets deployed at Suez at the initiative of Minister Persson, that was his idea with Daguerre Marshall, there was no consideration that the French or the Israelis or the British or the Egyptians would shoot at those peacekeepers. This was a political cover for an elegant withdrawal of those troops that had been engaged in the Suez operation. So it was, although these troops had guns, these troops were real troops, there was no belief that they would be called upon to really confront the troops that were withdrawing. And that is something that changes in a fundamental way when you have non-state actors, because they have much less political capital to lose. If Israel or France or Britain had misbehaved and been shooting at Canadian Indian peacekeepers, this would have been quite a major international crisis. If some militia shoots at Blue Helmets today, they're not going to damage their standing at the United Nations because they have no standing at the United Nations. And so the notion of having a stronger posture in a way starts with that basic consideration that you have to raise the threshold. You have to raise the pain of challenging peacekeepers because they have so much less political capital to lose. And so we move then from the symbolism of traditional peacekeeping to actual military deterrence, but classical deterrence, not deterrence with nuclear weapons, and that's much more complicated. So far, yes, not yet atomic weapons given to the DPKO. We have no MOU for that. So that is the first, I think, important contextual issue that needs to be stressed. The second is, of course, that civilians in modern conflicts, they are not just the collateral victims of conflict, they're really, more often than not, the target. Conflicts are less about control of territory and more about control of population. And so the civilians are really, it's much more dangerous to be a civilian, especially a weak civilian, a woman or a girl, than to be a soldier in a modern conflict. Soldiers are valuable assets, they are protected, they have also the means to protect themselves. The civilians, they are in a weaker position, and they are often the strategic objective. Terrorizing them, cleansing them from a particular territory is a strategic objective of the war. And so, in a way, the whole framework, and that's beyond today's seminar's discussion, the whole framework of the Geneva Conventions, in some ways, is at risk, because the relationship between civilians and war has changed in a big way. And for peacekeeping, that of course raises major issues. There is a sort of moral imperative, just as in any national law, non-assistance à personne en danger, c'est un délit. For a peacekeeper, seeing a woman being raped or a hut being burned and looking the other way, if he has the capacity to do something about it, it should not have to be written down in the Security Council resolution, actually. It's a basic decency to do something about it if you can do something about it. And it's a political necessity because, and that gets more complicated, because if a peacekeeping operation is seen to be there while civilians are being butchered, the whole credibility of the mission and therefore its capacity to influence a political process is really under threat. And so not being passive in the face of civilians being killed or martyrized in a conflict is not just a moral imperative, it's a political necessity. The Brahimi report, but Durch knows much more about it than I do in a way because he was one of the makers of the report. To me, is a reaction to, is in large part a reaction to those new issues that arose in a very vivid manner in the decade of the 90s. But I've read it several times. It was in a way when I came to run peacekeeping, it was my roadmap, my marching orders. That's how I saw it. So I tried to imbibe myself with its spirit, and I found great help in the report. But today I think it's important also to see the unanswered questions. Unanswered questions not by lack of thoughtfulness, but by political necessity, maybe. The Brahimi report had to walk a sort of a fine line between very conflicting views and expectations of member states. And so the answers to the two issues that I have just identified, new actors, new targets, are up to a point when you scratch the surface, they are, in my view, somewhat ambiguous. And that's why, I will come to that too, the capstone doctrine several years later still continues with the ambiguity. They are ambiguous because the report starts by reaffirming solemnly that consent of the local parties, impartiality, and use of force only in self-defense should remain the bedrock principles of peacekeeping. So, an affirmation of continuity. Then, when there is this sentence about this means that United Nations military units must be capable of defending themselves, other mission components, and the mission's mandate. Now, the last two words, mission's mandate, it opens a huge avenue. Because if the mandate can be anything. And so that is, that gives a lot of flexibility in the definition of peacekeeping. But essentially, it's sort of, it's not a contradiction, but it opens up things in a way that blurs the definition of peacekeeping in a fundamental way. And we haven't quite dealt with that. And then the report, because it has to keep with that balancing act, puts the emphasis on deterrence. Deterrence. And there I want to come back to this concept of deterrence. I think Rupert Smith, in his book on the utility of force, as a experienced military who had to live through the experience of the Balkans and Bosnia, he very clearly shows that deterrence in military terms is credible only if you are capable of taking action, following up on your deterrence. And so